So today we're going to focus on the envelope of our building. And when I say the envelope, of course, we're talking about the outside walls. Now, up to this point, we've had this red um, color on our walls, and we've had what looks like these metal panels for the moment. And if we click on this wall type, it's just called a basic wall ADC 259 CMU. Okay, but we're going to be going with something a little different. What do I mean by different? Well, first things first is I go back to the first floor and I click on this wall and I say edit type. I've got to start thinking about this wall from inside to out and how it's going to be constructed. So when I go to the edit of the structure, right now I just have this 2 3/8 metal panel on there. I have a 7 5/8 masonry unit, and on the other side I have an air layer and nothing else. Now, what we know for sure is that we have to have some sort of wall stud on the interior. And from our book and our study of our book in chapter 20, we learned that we're going to have a light gauge metal stud on the inside of our wall. So we've got to build this wall in a common sense way. So what we're going to do, so it doesn't change our whole building right away, what I'm going to do is simply click on this wall right here, and I am going to copy it out, right? Just so the change isn't so abrupt. And I'm going to work on building this wall out here. So I'm going to click on it and I'm going to say edit type. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say duplicate this wall. And this is going to be ADCG 259. And this is going to be exterior wall primary. Okay? Exterior wall primary. And it's also going to be a masonry type wall. Okay, now let's start editing it. Let's go in here and let's think this wall through. Because this is a primary brick and masonry type wall, the first thing we are going to do is we are going to change this metal panel layer on the outside to be something different. This is going to be brick masonry veneer. Okay, I'm going to stop the video so that we can talk about something for a moment. So what we discovered is that to change this material, we need to go in and we'll click our three dots, and we're going to go down. That we know that there's a brick in here, common. So we'll grab that, but we don't want to edit that because we may want to change the color of this down the road, right? So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say duplicate, and I'm going to say brick common primary wall, right? Or primary exterior wall. All right. So this is the pattern. This is what it's going to look like. We're going to hit apply. There we go. And now what we are going to do is adjust this dimension to what? To 3 5/8 of an inch, right? Now that's 3 5/8 of an inch. I want to pause the video and talk about something. So what we've discovered is that we are going to need an airspace in our wall. And on page 683 of our textbooks, figure 28.5, it demonstrates that a 2-inch airspace is what is typical. Now, the 2-inch airspace is for our mortar catching device to sit at the bottom of. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at this grayish area down here, if you see in the airspace right between the brick and before the rigid insulation, you see this mortar catching device. That's one version of it. A lot of them are this green color as well. And you can see what it will do is it will catch the majority of the mortar that falls out when the bricks are stacked, and it will prevent it from piling up the wall and taking away some of the thermal value of that space. But what it also wouldn't do, if this device wasn't in here, moisture could not escape from this airspace. Because it is a thermal airspace that has an R value of 1, what we have to remember is that moisture still has to escape. So what we need to do is we need to insert a layer in. And where we want to insert it, if we click here and we put insert, you see it puts it above, right? So I need to move it down, and I need to say that this is 2 inches, and by category, if I click on here, I can come in and just click on air and hit OK. I also want to change the function of this space from structure to a what? To a thermal air layer, okay? This is because if you look up here, our wall is starting to build a what? An R value as we put it together based on the materials we're using. That's one of the nice things about Revit. So we have our airspace, but our airspace comes between the brick and the what? The concrete masonry unit. Now, as we look at page 683, we can also see that there is a layer of rigid insulation. If we look at these two diagrams with the mortar catching device, we see that there is a piece of rigid insulation in here. I want to stop the video and just briefly talk about something. Okay, so we've discussed the R value of a few different things. Now we want to start assigning the functions to our layers. Out here, this is going to be a primary finish. Then we have an air layer. We have our concrete masonry units, but as we just discussed, we need to do what? We need another layer in here. So I am going to insert a layer here as a thermal layer, thermal air layer, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say that I want what? Rigid insulation. So where would we find that? Is it under insulation? I'm not seeing it. Insulation? No, I'm not seeing insulation there. Where could we find insulation? Let's pause the video and discuss some. So rigid insulation is what we're going to need, but what Revit assigns it is this really dull gray color. I like to come in here and say that this rigid insulation is this blue color. But again, I want to duplicate the material and put rigid insulation exterior wall, because I might have some on interiors for not necessarily insulative purposes but acoustic purposes later, and I want to be able to copy that. So I'm going to change this to this blue color, okay? And the rest of this information I can leave as is. I'll hit apply, and I'm going to also have 2 inches of this. Because I have 2 inches of this, watch what this does. Look how it changed my R value. Did you notice that? Keep an eye on this right here. If I change that to 1 inch, look what happens. My R value goes down significantly. So I'm going to take that back to 2 inches, and it goes up to 21. Then I have, as we go back to page 683, I have my rigid insulation, and then I have my backup wall. Now, notice I have another thermal air layer back here. In the next video, we will talk about what this is going to be assigned to, because now we're going to have to start building our actual structural wall on the inside. All of this is structural. What's making it structural is the concrete masonry unit bearing portion of the wall, but now we have to build the actual interior of our envelope, and we'll do that in the next video.